from Massey University, Associate Professor from the School of People, Environment and Planning. It's Associate Professor Grant Duncan. Grant, welcome back to the show, sir.
Hey guys, good to see you.
Good to be with
Grant.
you. And I'm sure you're enthralled about getting a receipt every year from a national government telling you where the tax money is going to be spent. So, hooray!
I'm one of those
Take my receipt from the supermarket.
So I really budget at a glance document. They put it out every year. That's the place to look.
Now, for people who want to anchor you, Grant, we reference you quite a lot on this show because you're probably the person who pulled us over the coals a little bit for taking too much notice about projected results to election day and how much we don't now look at, this is what it would look like in the House. We do look at polls and we do look at what it is for today, but we need to probably give you credit for the person who kind of dragged us away from taking too much attention to what this would project. In fact, what did we have last week, Chewy? There was the Curio Taxpayers Union poll. Basically, the headline read that we now didn't need an election because they were telling us that National and ACT could get there by themselves. And we thought that was good because that will save us a lot of time and money just to cancel the election and let the Taxpayers Union tell us that.
Back.
Yeah, it's a good thing. So that just to anchor you for our audience as to we reference you quite a bit. Certainly we reference your idea around that quite a bit and we've taken it on board. So thank you, sir, for adding to our show.
Glad to be helpful.
Now, let's have a look at this, shall we? Let's start with a Substack that you have written. Now, if people want to read this for themselves, there is actually a link in the description, I think, on all of our places we're broadcasting right now. So whether you're on YouTube or Facebook or maybe not on Twitter, but on the other two, there's a link to your story to go and check it out. You've written a piece this morning simply titled, How Do the Left Lose? I will read out one little paragraph and then I want to throw it to you, Grant. This is a conversation that we've had quite a lot here, and let's flesh it out a bit. You've said this: as with the defence of free speech, however, the baton of civil rights has now been passed from left to right. Why have the left given their hard-won prizes away to their opponents to own and defend? It's like giving away one's savings to the employer who paid the minimum wage. So let's have a look at this, and let's have the open-ended question to ask with is, you can just tell us from your thoughts, your writings, your meanderings, how do the left lose, in your opinion?
Well, they fight one another. That's how they lose, and they accuse one another of things. And I mean, people do behave badly sometimes. People do say rude things, or look, I'm an academic. I do my best not to offend anyone, but I am conscious of I use my free speech, but I'm conscious as an academic with academic freedom, using that freedom responsibly. But, you just never know when something that you say might come across wrong to someone. And I think it is okay for us to, register objections to say, hey, I don't think that's right. But I think one of the problems that's happening in the left at the moment is the virulence of accusations against people for supposedly offending others. And so, as I say, it's okay to call people out, but I just think tone it down a little bit. That would be, showing a bit of self-discipline, because the way that the left will lose this election, well, not the only way, but one of the ways in which they'll lose this election is by carrying on with the infighting that we've seen recently.
Let me bring an example to you of what you're saying, because I reckon there's a jump the shark moment as well. And I think the jump the shark moment of attacking one's own happened last week with Elizabeth Kerekere. I want to play you a clip, it's only 15 seconds, because Elizabeth Kerekere, as a part of her defense of herself and the accusations of bullying, decided she would go on attack by claiming that there was racism issues within the Green Party.
Oh, definitely a racism problem in the Greens. All of the work that I have done around helping restructure the party and focus on how we give life to Te Tiriti. I think a lot of our supporters will be really disappointed.
So is that a concrete example of what you've just talked about, how the left attacks itself? Now, I know Elizabeth Kerekere is kind of defending herself because she's been going through some stuff, but I know Chewy and I have experienced it in this show and others that the other thing that happened with Ms. Kerekere is the reports that were coming out about her bullying says that I guess I'll say the accusations from within is that she does throw that kind of label around a lot. In other words, it seems that what happens is the accusation of you being a bad person is more so than the content of the argument we're having amongst one ourselves. Is that sort of an example of what you're talking about?
Well, it's an example, and whilst I wouldn't want to stop Elizabeth from saying what she's saying, I would question why she's saying it in the media. And secondly, the other remarkable event was, of course, I think the other Saturday morning when James and Marama had to be cross-examined by the press about that whole investigation. Now, politically, that is a colossal waste of time. That is the Green Party's co-leaders talking to the media about internal squabbles rather than talking about climate change, rather than talking about what they would like to be doing if they were sitting at the cabinet table after the next election, and therefore taking away from their impact on the next election. So, I mean, it's not for me to say who was right and wrong in that whole argument, really, because I wasn't there. I'm not a Green Party member. I wasn't in the room when those things happened. But all I'm saying is that that kind of accusation made public is bad for the electoral prospects of any political party. It reminds me a little bit, and I'm still not quite sure whether I believe this, honestly, but I remember hearing that apparently, I'm still shaking my head in disbelief, but I heard that a lot of left-wing NGOs and lobby groups in Washington, D.C. nowadays, their management is spending most of their time dealing with internal complaints of one staff member against another and that kind of thing.
Wow.
And so a lot of wasted energy goes on in left-wing organizations as people deal with and investigate. And it takes time. If a person lodges a complaint, I've had one against me in the past. I know what it's like. You guys, it sounds like have had them too. When people lodge complaints, it takes time to deal with these things properly. It is wasted effort. It distracts from your political objectives. And of course, it costs your organization money that you could be, and time that you could be spending on something more productive.
The reason I reference this as a jump the shark moment as well is, I mean, as you say, we weren't there, we don't know the full truth, but if you were to list off all the political parties and statistically put, where do you think racism is going to be active? I think the Greens would be at the bottom of the list. And I feel like that Elizabeth Kirikiri's comments have got no traction. And I wonder if that's because everyone can kind of go, look, it's okay if you're angry or upset or but look, we're not really going to buy into that, at least that argument. It feels pretty unlikely that party would be the place for it. I was going to say as well, Grant, you're right about when we have complaints that we have, but we've got a new system. I can show you our new system for complaints here, Chewy. It's this. This is our new system for complaints. They go in here. So from now on, our complaint system is pretty streamlined, wouldn't you say, Chewy?
That's new. I assume you bought that over the weekend.
Any thoughts you want to take up there, Chewy? Yeah, they're easy. You just do this and then you do that. It's harder to do this, so if it's on Twitter, you've got to kind of crush the screen. It's a bit more difficult to screw it up. But what are your thoughts, Chewy?
I mean, my thoughts with Elizabeth's comments there is obviously, famously, the Green Party seems to be a hive of racism. But then I thought, well, hang on. There is also... There's a lot of white lefties and a lot of white greenies, and there's also a lot of performative behavior in those groups of like, of course we follow the treaty, of course that's not even up for debate. But so I wonder if it's that sort of aspect that she's speaking to. Again, I'm not part of the Green Party. I haven't been privy to any of these meetings or anything like that. I would love to know what examples and what people she's talking about, but obviously we're not probably not going to hear about that.
Yeah,
but yeah, I agree. It's there's a lot of energy. I mean, this story would have died on the vine if the Greens behaved like any other party and went, it's internal, move on.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about our policy that we're bringing?
Yeah, it shouldn't be in the news, and we shouldn't be talking about it now. It should have been kept internal.
Yeah.
Back to your article. Let's have a look at another party article. This is what you say. In left social movements today, and I guess that's like whether it's an NGO, if you just spoke about, or a political party, the principal aim seems to be preemptive accusation against somebody, supposedly offending somebody else. You know, we see that a lot in the media. Like someone will take umbrage for something that someone, let's just pick a comedian out of someone will take umbrage for something the comedian has said about another group of people when they're not part of that group of people, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, but that's what I think of when I read what you've written there, against somebody supposedly offending somebody else. And hence the prominent gesture is the pointed finger. The pervasive effect then is fear, the fear of being accused and cancelled. To avoid being cancelled, one accuses the other first. So before you can get me, I'm going to fucking get you. That's the game we're playing. If this is the best that the political left now hopes for, it may be because they've lost hope for collective action and a better future. Can you expand on that, what you mean by that?
Oh, I think Barack Obama put it nicely, didn't he, when he talked about the circular firing squad, where the left forms a circular firing squad and they shoot at one another. They lose sight of the target. Now, I'm not denying that people sometimes say offensive things. That happens, and we can deal with that like adults, I think. Well, we ought to be able to, and debate things openly. It's not about silencing people. I think all I'm saying really in there is that I think that the left has lost sight of the goals. Okay. And that's why I reintroduced a little bit of history there about the struggles for a universal suffrage, for social security, the huge scrap that we had to defeat fascism in the 1940s. I mean, real fascism, as opposed to finger pointing, you're a fascist. Real world fascism, all right. And the efforts that people went to, ultimately partly in defence of the principle of one person, one vote, and free competitive elections, and of course the civil right to express ourselves politically, to disagree with one another, as well as to express dissenting opinions. The right to dissent, the right to freedom of speech, fundamentally was a left-wing cause originally. Civil disobedience, dissent, the struggle against the manufacturing of consent in the big corporate media and so forth, and the political clobbering machine and so forth. Those were left-wing objectives. Now what's happened is that those left-wing prizes, so to speak, have been handed over to be defended, to be owned and defended by the right. One person, one vote. I know very well that it's been associated with the Hobson's Pledge group and things like that. I get that point, and I think that's what Te Pāhi Māori was saying when they objected to the principle of one person, one vote. But it's forgetting the struggle that went on, the long historical left-wing struggle that went on to achieve that as a principle of political equality, to end discrimination, to put an end to government by a landed minority. And we just, forgetting that history and forgetting those kinds of bigger objectives that the left wing ought to be fighting on behalf of the people in terms of, say, social security, housing, environment, all of those questions get lost when people start pointing fingers at one another, slamming doors, walking out on one another, and making a scene in public about it. It's one thing to have arguments, another thing to let those arguments become public, and they then become the story about your party.
I can give you a real concrete example of that. It's not in New Zealand, but the ACLU in America, massively left-wing political party, but were very much about freedom of speech first and foremost. Like, they were the defenders of the freedom of speech. I've actually done a podcast with a guy called David, I think it was David Goldberger. David Goldberger was a lawyer in 1967 who represented the Nazis against, or was it 78? Oh, it was 78. The Nazi group that wanted to march through Chicago. Jewish, left-wing lawyer defending the Nazis on their free speech with the ACLU, a primarily left-wing organisation, but just the concrete version of freedom of speech. Within the last couple of years, and this is one of the reasons I spoke to David, he's kind of come out denouncing the ACLU, because what they're doing now is they're picking and choosing what they can defend when it comes to free speech. And for example, I remember the conversation we had, and if people want to look it up, they can find it on my DOC podcast, is he was talking about, issues would come into the ACLU about, Trump, and they wouldn't take those cases. but they'd come in about some progressive left wing, and they would take those cases. So this left wing organisation has moved away from being free speech purists, and as you say, has handed it to the right, who are now the people who are able to say what you want. Yes, you're offended. Yes, I hate your speech, but say what you want. It really has flipped. It's a sad day, actually. It's a sad indictment of the political left in general, I think.
That's right. In a weird way, I mean, if you took this to the extreme, and I'm not saying this will happen, but if you took it to the extreme, the left would more or less be asking for some kind of Stalinist ruler who would take those accused of offending someone out the back and just shoot them, eliminate them that way. And so there has always been an element on the left that is quite authoritarian, a sort of centralizing version of so-called democracy. But the kind of democracy that I think works for us and works for other people around the world, and which we really have to defend these days, does depend on political equality and freedom of speech. And when I say political equality, we have a fairly good system in New Zealand now with proportional representation, where everyone's vote pretty much has a close to equal weighting in the final results.
Yeah. Yeah, look, the last part of your article talks about where to from here, what the left needs to do. I'll ask you this before, and I said this before we came on here. Since I've been working in media, right, so this is 2000, right, late 90s, early 2000s, when I started to get into news and current affairs world, I've said that in the Western world, the world over, the right does politics better than the left. The right speaks with one voice, even if it's a horrible voice, like you see the Ted Cruz's of this world not wanting to support Trump, but they get in lockstep behind him. So they do politics. When I say better, I'm not using that word meaning better as in better for us, but they play the game better and they play by their political rules better. The left have always seemed to me to be more fractured. And again, looking into America, because Bernie didn't get in, a whole bunch of the Bernie voters went, fuck you all, we're not voting for anybody. So the left in general don't seem to want to get in line with the left. They seem to want to get in line with their party, so it's more fractured. And I firmly believe, and if you have a look at the votes in most Western countries, that more people tend to vote for the left, but because it's fractured, it's one of the things that keeps the left versus right continuum more 50-50. Like if you look at the popular vote in America, the left should have won all bar one of the last, since 1992, since all of those elections. Now, they've got a different system, but the idea of the right doing politics better and the left being more fractured, does that sort of line up with what you're saying as well? Because what I hear you doing is talking about the infighting of that, and that speaks to me of the fracture. Is that a similar sort of thought we're going through?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's generally a little bit more sort of discipline, and as you say, sticking together in right-wing parties. I guess you could say that one of the sort of joyful sides of the left is that there is more debate, more argument, a bit more fractiousness, and that's okay. But I think lately it's the kind of venomousness of some of these accusations that I think is kind of scary. It's gone to another level where I guess people want to launch accusations with a certain kind of vigor that is really unnecessary. It's not achieving anything. And so, I think you're absolutely right, is that, we know also from quite a lot of research that to a large extent, the preferences of people on lower incomes aren't really sort of filtering through or being met in terms of actual policies of governments, real world policies. The preferences of higher income people tend more frequently to be actually put into action or met in real world policy making. And so the other reason, of course, there's other reasons why the left are up against it. People on lower incomes are less likely to vote. And of course, it's harder to get campaign finance from people on lower incomes as well. And we can see that in some of the campaign finance figures just lately, for instance. So there's a number of reasons why I think, left-wing parties are struggling. But I guess my suggestion simply in that article is don't make it worse for yourself by publicly infighting and making the news cycle focus on your accusations against one another. Or I think, for instance, we're making up false allegations about how the principle of one person, one vote is racist simply because Hobson's pledge was using it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
as I say,
Yes. So that's the metric. We've talked about this before, and I think I might even talk about it with you, Grant. But that Antifa rally that I've talked about numerous times in America with the two old people holding the American flag as Antifa went past, and Antifa guys were all screaming racist, and my position was, well, that old couple might be racist. We don't know, but the metric to decide that is not holding an American flag. That's not the metric to decide whether they are or aren't. So screaming it out like that seems to be pointless. Hey, Chewy, I've got one more question about this year, but do you want to jump in with anything as well?
Yeah, look, I think a big problem, this isn't so much, I guess, with our political parties and that thing. I think part of the Greens' problem was that they want to really stick to those core tenets of being a transparent party. It was the same with the leadership debate and all of that sort of thing, is that they wanted to see that their processes were open and everybody could see. And that's so different from every other party, which is like, no, you can't see the machinery of what we do, that it sticks out. And then when Elizabeth's gone, she's come out swinging, and she's come out with accusations that no one really expected. I think that, when we've seen other leadership struggles or Sharma's, not a leadership struggle, but a bit of intra-party drama. We've got Sharma, we've got Nationals struggles and that sort of thing. And it's gossipy, bitchy stuff that plays really, really well in the news. But then when we're talking about, I guess, in the left generally, I think one of the biggest problems that the left have is the assumption that everybody is at the same point of the journey. And there's almost a performative aspect of it to say, I'm the most enlightened one. I've got all of my ducks in a row, and this person doesn't and must be shunned.
Yeah.
So that's a really good point. Yeah. I think we need to. I mean, I'm a teacher, so I kind of get that not everyone's at the same stage of the learning curve, including myself. And so I would hope that if I screw up and say something that someone thinks is off key, that they'd have a little bit of toleration when they correct me, just as I would do for my students. Because occasionally students say off key things in class. It's incumbent on me to find kind ways of pointing it out and shifting the conversation in a different direction. And honestly, occasionally I do get some jaw droppers that I have to deal with on both the left and the right. Get some sort of interesting comments come out in class. I've got to find a way to contain what that person has said without humiliating them in front of the other students, and yet also showing that I'm trying to correct things. Can be quite difficult to do in the moment, so to speak. But it's a difficult thing to do. But we have to find ways of, just as you said, understanding that we're at different stages in a learning process. So if someone says something that doesn't seem to be up with the play in terms of where the current left-wing thinking is about this or that, please just extend them a little bit of toleration and care, and try to help them along that journey in a gentle sort of way, understanding that we don't all understand things equally.
But it's not even just though understanding, because understanding implies that the enlightened person has the correct answer. When we figure out this along the way, and there's lots of things that we're figuring out, and one of the things that's hardest is in this journey of figuring shit out, someone taking authority position of absolute truth does nothing but cause conflict, because we're traveling through this universe together at the moment, figuring things out. And when we get to the end of the part of the journey for this bit that we're figuring out, we'll then know. But people talking in absolutes now about stuff that we're still figuring out, that's sort of what I hear. And I'm not necessarily saying it's for the left. We can say it's for anybody. That's what I hear as one of the big hurdles, because then, of course, when they put themselves up as the expert and they have gospel truth, they can then point to the other person, using the finger, and going, wrong, you're an XYZ phobe, whatever it is, or you're a XYZ bigot, or whatever the thing is. And as Chewy was saying, I'm the enlightened one. But the truth is, these people often speak of a world in black and white. And I hate to inform them this, but we pretty much live in shades of greys in probably I don't know, I won't put a percentage on it, but I'll just say most of our society is in the shades of grey. So absolutes are a pretty tough thing to handle, especially from people who are on the journey to finding if that truth is 100% right or partly right or wrong. Who knows?
Yeah, totally hear what you're saying there, Pat. And what you just illustrated too is that thing where that virulent accusation is behind it. What I'm saying is that behind it, I have to accuse you before I get accused.
Yeah, exactly.
You see, that's why I say it's preemptive accusation, because I'm afraid of being cancelled. Therefore, I'm going to come out in front and do that accusation in front of everybody so everyone can see that I'm onto it. But this is, as I say, this is a kind of intoleration, but also it's, I think, fundamentally a waste of energy, honestly.
The last thing you write in your article, and we can wrap up with this because it'd be good to get your take on it, is basically where to from here. Meanwhile, all that the left as a whole need to do in order to lose this election is to carry on infighting. You say, what then might a pathway forward look like? Left MPs need to recall their history and remember that they were elected to and get paid to work for the people and the planet. They could apply at least a modicum of self-discipline and stop the finger pointing and door slamming. I think the thing I love about this paragraph is this bit about working for the people. And I hear that every politician gets paid by the people, but the left seem to have lost that idea of they were originally the party of the factory floor. And those people are, when you say recall their history, is what I think of when I hear the history. Like when Christopher Luxon came out in the last 6 months talking about the CEOs don't like Labor. Here on the show, we said, good, Labor, grab that. And you can say to the National, you guys can have the CEOs and we'll have the factory floor workers. Like they could have actually used that as a way to, as you say, recall their history. Anything else you can expand on for that kind of idea around what the left would need to do, in your opinion, in this upcoming election to kind of get over the line?
Well, I guess perhaps I could have added there that actually we're only looking at a minority of left MPs who've caused all of these ructions. Most of them are actually, I think, being quite disciplined. I probably should have added that in. But I've just finished writing a column on the coming budget for the conversation that'll come out in the morning. And so I'm actually quite disappointed. This emphasis on, we're going to do the basics for the East Coast rather than build back better, just the basics. And the budget is going to be all no frills. Now, this terminology, basic and no frills, sounds to me like the lowest possible level of aspiration that you can have. I would almost go so far as to say that these are code words for austerity budget. We'll have to wait and see what it actually contains. But I just find this incredibly disappointing. And you can see that the thing that bugged me was the way that columnists in the media just picked up on this and just repeated this phrase, no frills, over and over again as become the mantra. And people are just swallowing it and accepting it, not saying, excuse me, can we have some bold ideas? Can we have some vision for the future, please, especially from a Labour Party? Can we talk about building a better nation or something, rather than just this really no ambition, no frills, absolute basics? That's all you're getting. And I'm just wondering what some of those, sort of basic rebuilt bridges in Hawke's Bay are going to look like. Are they going to be, why aren't we using this as an opportunity to improve that infrastructure? Future-proof it.
I think you've also just vocalised the frustration of many of us for the whole last term. A Labor government that had a majority and could have done anything, could have been transformative. I mean, yes, you can look to point to COVID and say it was more difficult, but they still could have done stuff and they've chosen not to. And now they've come out the back of it. They feel like they have to be bland near the middle to try and get back in again. But I'm with you because COVID for them ended badly. They've now got nothing to hang their hats on to say, look at what we did, because they've been milquetoast. They've done, look, let's get me wrong, they've done very well with COVID overall. No, I don't actually many complaints here, but because that's the one thing that many on the right have picked up to use against them, they have nothing else to then hang their hat on and say, but what about this and what about this and what about this, because they haven't used that majority. So I hear you, Grant.
Well, no, that is a squandered opportunity. And Robertson has been talking, and Hipkins have been talking a lot about skills and education in the coming budget. But when you look at what they've done, all they've done in tertiary education, for instance, was to amalgamate polytechs. And that really is a rolling disaster from what I can tell. They've done nothing for universities. We're looking at, mass layoffs at AUT, Otago. Before long, it'll be Massey. And so, they've done nothing for us. Once again, no aspiration. We're living in an age where we're about to enter an era which is going to be run by artificial intelligence. We're not really doing anything. We're not using our tertiary education system to say, hey, how are we going to get on top of this? How are we going to sort of join some of this innovation? But also, how are we going to explore what it will mean to be human, what it will mean to be a good society in this new world that we're going into? We really need to be doing something about that. I don't hear this government saying anything about it. I don't actually hear our vice chancellors talking about it really very much. All they're doing is worrying about the effect of ChatGPT on cheating. No one's really asking these questions.
Yeah.
The obvious questions.
Yeah, that's true. Hey, look, Grant, thank you so much for joining us today. Associate Professor Grant Duncan from Massey University, the School of People, Environment and Planning. As we said in the link for this video, you'll get the link to the Substack. We love having you on, Grant, and you're welcome back anytime.
Great.
I'm sure we'll talk again super soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for your time, mate.
All right, all the best.
Thank you.